Okay. In the name of God, um, we're having the pleasure of talking with Mark Glenn, and we're going to talk about the issue of Syria. Hello, Mark. How are you doing?
Hello, it's good to be back here with you, even at a distance of about 10,000 miles away.
Yes, it is interesting. Okay, so I'm going to ask the questions, and first of all, having a general question about the situation in Syria. How do you see the situation in Syria right now?
Well, as much as it has been obviously devastating for the people of Syria, and certainly very difficult for the world powers that are assisting Syria, namely Iran, namely Russia, Hezbollah. Nevertheless, I think that an honest assessment of the situation has to be that the Zionists and the American imperialists have basically gotten almost everything that they wanted. Syria is in ruins. It is destabilized. It is only being held together as a state right now by the sheer will of the Syrian people and, of course, the assistance that Iran and Russia and Hezbollah have offered. But as far as a nation itself, it has been destroyed almost in every bit of the same way that Iraq was destroyed, in the way that Libya was destroyed. Of course, the one thing that Israel and the West have not yet achieved is the downfall of the Assad regime and the replacement of that regime with a government that is going to be more cooperative with what Israel and the United States and the West have in mind. So at the end of the day, as much as those of us who are lovers of justice and who operate with a great deal of compassion for the people of Syria, and as much as we're, holding on to hope, nevertheless, we have to be very honest in our assessment and our understanding of the situation right now in saying that it has been nothing less than a living, extended nightmare for the people of Syria,
That's right.
and just one more fingerprint indicating truly what the evil nature of the Zionist regime, what the imperialist regimes in the United States and the UK and other countries in the West, if any other country had done to Syria, if this had been done to the United States or to any Western country, causing the kind of devastation that it caused, the refugee crisis certainly, a country that would do that to the West, to the United States, to Israel, would have been wiped off the map. But the fact that nothing has come towards the United States or Israel or the West as a result of these horrifically evil deeds really is a statement about how powerful the evil forces are in the world today.
Okay. Right, and as you have explained, we have seen lots of problems in the not only problems but tragedies in the Syria. And recently we have the issue of Aleppo, which every side tried to show it as the other's fault. What's your opinion about the whole thing? And we had also the issue of the hospital, and for example, some people would say that it was the fault of Russia and the bombs that Russia would use or Syrian army would use. The other part says that it was actually the fault of the free Syrian armies and all the rebels who are fighting with against Assad. So, what's your opinion about that, and how do you analyze the situation?
Well, whenever I hear ill-informed or agenda-driven people blaming the Assad regime for the horrific bombing of the hospital, I remind myself, and I try to remind them, that the sarin gas attack of several years ago was blamed on Assad. It's now come out that it was the rebels themselves who had been given that sarin gas by the United States. And so whenever I hear information, false information like this, I recognize it immediately for what it is, which is just as a psychological operation. It's just a form of warfare that is used to obviously put the Assad regime in a bad light, and the Russians as well. Even if it's characterized as just an accident, the West uses things like this to say, oh, look at what these horrible Russians have done.
That's right.
You know, they accidentally dropped a bomb on a hospital, killed all of these people. They shouldn't be there. We need to put pressure on them. We need to get the United Nations involved. The United States needs to step in there and to bring order and stability to the situation. You know, we have to remember that the motto of Israel's Mossad, which is by way of deception we shall do war, you know, they didn't just come across this motto because it happened to sound nice. Lying and deception and duplicity deliberately caused confusion, deliberately caused obscurity. This is one of the main avenues, main mechanism by which Israel and the West are able to achieve all of this evil that they're able to achieve in the world, is that they are able to cast this magic spell over the minds of millions of people, particularly in their own countries. And the people have no idea really what the nature of the problem is. And so the fact that we have not really heard a great deal of discussion coming out of Syria, coming out of Russia as regards the bombing of the hospital in particular, what this tells me is that for reasons related either to intelligence or to certain geopolitical aims that both of the countries have in mind, that at this point they have chosen not to be as forthcoming with the information. But we can rest assured that when the time comes, when they decide to pull this ace out of their sleeve, play this card on the world stage, that it will be something that will be extremely embarrassing for the West when it's discovered that it was probably the Free Syrian Army or some faction of that group that was responsible for doing it. One thing that I have learned in watching this drama play out is that the Russians are very, very economical with information. They have made themselves very unpredictable, and when you expect that they're going to do one thing, they wind up doing something else. And so the fact that the Russians have not yet come forward and offered at least a very loud explanation as to what happened tells me that they are engaging in the typical business that they engage in, which is that they hold on to that information until it can do the most damage to the other side, at which point they will go ahead and they will throw that card down on the table.
Okay, that's right. And okay, talking about the Russia, how can you analyze the situation that we have now after the involving of Russia in this war? We can see that Russia has been involved in this war directly, mainly because of the air support, and it's been a while, and after maybe just few months, Mr. Putin just decided to take away and return all his forces, not all his forces, but some of his forces from the Syria back to Russia. And now we're saying that Syria is not going to be supported so much by Russia. So how can you analyze that, and what is your idea and opinion about this situation now and before involving of Russia in this war?
Well, Putin and Russia's becoming involved in this took many people by surprise. It did not take me by surprise. I had been talking about this years before the situation in Syria turned into the mess that it was in. I said that at some point in the future, the Russians are going to step in and they are going to assert themselves in the Middle East situation. And I base this on a few things that had been said by Putin in the past, where he made cryptic comments alluding to the fact that no one should underestimate Russia, and that Russia stood to play a very important role in bringing stability back to especially that part of the world. Now, Putin's critics and Russia's critics, of course, will point to what happened with Libya and how the Russians had basically allowed the West, allowed NATO to go in and to Libya what they did. At the time, the way that I read this was that the Russians they set this trap for the West a long time ago. And the only way that they were going to be able to create the picture that we see today, and remember, it's not just a military picture of the Russians asserting themselves in Syria. It is also a diplomatic and a public relations war as well. The Russians have stepped into this role now where they're standing in the world in terms of world opinion, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the Islamic world. Which is very important because we're talking about over 1 billion people here spread out over almost 100 countries. And the Russians have, because of their insertion into the Syrian situation, they have been able to raise their standing in the world, and especially in the Islamic world, immeasurably. And I don't think that this could have taken place had the Russians not allowed the United States and the West to go into Libya and to do what they did. So, in a very cold, realpolitik sort of way, the Russians are looking at this and they're saying, well, yes, 100,000 or more innocent people have died in Libya, but at the end of the day, the only way that we're going to be able to defeat this monster that we're fighting right now in the form of Zionist and Western imperialist designs is that we have to give them a shovel and to allow them to dig themselves into this hole so that they cannot get out of it. So, and this goes back much further than simply the situation in Libya. As I point out to people and trying to paint a picture in better understanding Russia's role in all of this, we have to go back to the 1960s and even before that, when the Russians, at that time, of course, they were referred to as the Soviet Union, they played an extremely important role in the Middle East. Remember that countries such as Egypt and Jordan, which today, of course, totally under the thumb of the United States and under the thumb of Israel, these were Russia's client states in the region. Okay, so the Russians being pushed out of the region, in the fact that Egypt fell into the American sphere of influence and then Jordan fell into the American sphere of influence. This was a total blow to Russia's standing geopolitically and in other ways. So they always, they held on. They refused to let Syria go. And they've been waiting for this right confluence of events to come together in such a way that they take advantage of this and then move back into the region. And I really do believe that this is one of the parts of this agenda, is that they want to make sure that the Russians do not come back to the region the way that they were in the 1960s. And so they are in this desperate mode right now, and they, by that I mean, of course, Israel and the United States, to shore up their support in countries such as Saudi Arabia and such as Egypt, Jordan, places like that, because they know that on the diplomatic and on the geopolitical stage, the Russians are sitting very pretty, to use a phrase, a phraseology that we use here in the West. And so, at the same time, however, I think it's important that we keep in mind how high the stakes are in all of this and how far all of the players involved are willing to go. In 1967, when the USS Liberty was being attacked by Israel, working in collusion with the United States, the goal of this operation was to sink the Liberty. All 300 of the American servicemen on board would die. This would be blamed on Egypt, which at that time was a client state of the Soviet Union, and there would be great political pressure put on Russia to be pushed out of the region. At that time, the Russian premier, telephoned Lyndon Johnson while the attack was taking place. And he said, "We know what you're doing, and if you want a war, we will give you a war." The United States had F-4 Phantom bombers loaded with nuclear weapons. They were only 3 minutes away from delivering their nuclear payloads on Cairo.
Yeah.
Russians were perfectly willing to go to war with the United States at that time, and they are just as willing to go to war with the United States today over this issue. And so, as much as I said, as much as we look with hope that the assistance that the people of Syria are getting from the Russians, from the Iranians, and from Hezbollah, at the same time, I think we have to be very cautious in our optimism, in understanding that what we see here is a very high-stakes battle taking place between two nuclear-armed powers.
That's right.
Over the same piece of territory, and we're all in the middle of it.
Okay. All right. And as I don't want to take much of your time, as the last question, how would you see the future of Syria? And I would like you to explain it in short-term and long-term scale. And how would you just, predict about the future of Syria about that?
Okay. Well, again, and I don't want to sound unnecessarily alarming. I don't wish to frighten people, but again, we are dealing with great powers here, and they have very, very high stakes in who wins this battle. The one thing that we have not discussed in all of this has been Israel. At least we haven't discussed it in the to the extent that I think it needs to be discussed. One of the lies that the Zionists used in conning the people of the West into allowing the creation of this monster in the Middle East was that the Jews of Europe, they just wanted a little slice of land for themselves that they could call home. Well, when we honestly look at the real narrative, the real design here behind the creation of Israel, it is not, and it never was, simply about holding one little slice of land and keeping it at that. We have to remember here that there are fundamentalist and irrational religious overtones that are associated with this that are not just decades old. It didn't begin with Theodore Herzl. We're talking about religious ideas here that are thousands and thousands of years old. And those religious ideas are very specific about what the land of Israel is supposed to encompass. And it is not just this little slice of land like a Riviera of the Middle East.
That's right.
Talking about a slice of land that goes all the way from the Nile to the Euphrates rivers. Something along the lines of 4 times the size of the state of Texas in the United States. In and of itself is a very, very large state. And so that piece of land encompasses not just historic Palestine, but all of Lebanon, all of Syria, all of Jordan, almost going all the way up to the border with Iran, and even parts of Saudi Arabia, and then some purists say even going as far north as into Turkey. Now, present regime in control of Israel, and by that we're talking about these hardcore fundamentalist right-wing Likud types, and they have other names as well. It's not just Likud. You have a Jewish Home, you have the Shah's Party, you have Betenu, you have all of these. The one thing that unites all of these crime families, these political crime families, is their idea that Israel's awakening it hasn't even yet begun. And so I believe that this business with Syria is tied to that. If you have a tough piece of meat, okay, the easiest way to make that meat easier to chew is to run it through a meat grinder or some other way to tenderize it, to take a hammer and to pound it into a pulp so that it is easier to chew up. And essentially, this is what they have done to Syria. Certainly, this is what they did to Iraq, is that they are preparing the way for the expansion of Israel's borders outward to eventually include all of these lands that the Jews believe was given to them by their God within the pages of the Torah. And so when you're dealing with somebody, especially such as Netanyahu, who is inherently irrational, he is driven by these very fundamentalist and irrational religious ideas. He believes in a God who favors his people above everyone else on the planet. And this God who supposedly has commanded Netanyahu and his people to go and to absorb, conquer, devour, destroy, capture, whatever word we want to use, all of that land between the Nile and the Euphrates rivers. And so when you're dealing with this kind of religiously inspired mental illness, and that really is the best way to characterize it, you're dealing with a group of people here who literally are capable of doing anything. So would these people be willing to get a war started between the United States and Russia in the same fashion that they attempted to do in 1967 with the attack on the U.S. liberty? Absolutely. And what makes it even more worrisome is that right now, if the poll numbers are to be believed, Donald Trump is probably going to be the next American president. And as much as Donald Trump has made certain noises that give the appearance that he is pro-Israel, the fact of the matter is that he's not. He's saying these things in order to increase his chances of getting elected. And I do believe that Donald Trump is just the face of something that is much bigger than him, that includes very powerful elements within the military, within the intelligence community, and I would say going further outside the United States and even some of the NATO countries who understand that Netanyahu and his people, that it's very late in the stages here, and they're about to pull off a fast one that could embroil the United States and the West in a war with Russia that literally could destroy thousands of years of human civilization. And so you have these elements now who are working against Benjamin Netanyahu and his people. And so with that in mind, we have to keep in mind, when Benjamin Netanyahu was holding up that picture years ago at the United Nations of that bomb with a lit fuse, and he was holding this up, and he was using this as a representation of what he said was Iran's nuclear program, but that's not what it was. Okay, this was Netanyahu's way of threatening the world and telling the world that this wasn't an Iranian bomb, a cartoon of an Iranian bomb that he was holding up. It was a cartoon of an Israeli bomb. And what he's saying, in effect, is that we are getting ready to blow up the world if you don't give us what we want. And so that's the thing that concerns me, especially with regards to Syria. If the Russians and the Iranians and Hezbollah, if they are able to bring stability back to this situation, and as a result, the United States and the West lose so much of their public standing that we see revolutions, just like the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Imagine if this were to take place in Egypt, if this were to take place in Saudi Arabia, if it were to take place in Jordan, all of these Islamic countries that right now are under the thumb of the United States. Imagine if 1979 were to arrive in 2016 or 2017, and all of these countries in the Middle East followed suit as the Iranians did, and the United States was pushed out of the region and the Russians moved in as the new superpower. What would Israel be willing to do at that point?
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think that all of us should be concerned with.
Okay. Thank you so very much for all the explanations. And actually, when you're talking, I cannot stop actually hearing and noting and taking notes from your words. Actually, it's all of that so precious
Thank
and so informative.
Well, I'm
And
I always look forward to working with you, Ali. So never feel like you're a bother to me. I look forward to these. I cherish these engagements that we have because I know that we are both brothers on the battlefield fighting against the same enemy.
thank you.